So welcome back, everyone. This is our third session. And in this session, it is my hope to finish up taking you through some strategies and approaches for integrative negotiations, and then move into how do you actually plan for a negotiation. And if you read negotiation literature, you will find that about 70% of a negotiation is decided before the parties actually sit down. So what is that in terms of, it's referred to as 3D negotiation? What are those behind the scene steps that you can take to increase your ability to leverage and make doable and durable agreements at the table? Just by way of brief recap, and to be honest, this is more for me than you, just to get me centered on what we've done and what we're going to do. We started out our sessions together, or this mini course, by looking at the two major frameworks for negotiation, that being the distributive approach and the integrative approach. And if you remember, three main questions guide whether or not you use a distributive or an integrative approach. How important is the outcome? How important is the relationship? And what are your long-term goals? If your primary focus is on the outcome, getting the best price for something, then the distributive approach to negotiations would be something that you would want to look at. And if you remember, when we talk about distributive negotiations, that is identifying what is your target price, meaning ideally, where would you like to come in paying for whatever it is? In this case, I gave you the example of a dog. What is your reservation price? Meaning the highest or lowest you would go before your plan B, which is something outside of the negotiation, kicks in. And just by pure strategy, the stronger your plan B is, the more leverage or confidence you bring to the table. So I always encourage you to make sure that your plan B is as robust as possible. Now, we like to talk about transparency and sharing and stuff like that. Yeah, but not your BATNA. If you tell me what your BATNA is, and I'm kind of shady, I will try to make that less appealing to you. So do not share your plan B or your reservation, the most or least you will spend for something, with the person that you're negotiating. If you do that, that is going to be the part where the aspect or the point that I want to start at. Now, in negotiation and distributive negotiation, I also said to make sure you have some concessions lined up. What are things that, it's not that big a deal to me. I'm willing to give this up. And in the example that I gave you, one of them could have been, you know what, I don't really care about the conference rooms. I want all of my team on the 10th floor, but I don't need all those conference rooms. So would you offer the conference room in exchange for something else? And that strategy is called concessions. However, when we make concessions, we must do so mindfully. And what do I mean by that is when you're making a concession for someone to value it, they have to know the cost. What are you giving up? What does it mean to you? And then do not leave it to chance or their discretion to give you something in return. State what you want in return. So in the negotiation about the conference rooms, it could be, you know, Betsy, there are 8 conference rooms on the floor. I know that you have a lot of team meetings and sometimes you have them simultaneously. I'm willing to give you one of our conference rooms. However, that will require us to sometimes meet after hours so that you will have access to the conference room between 8 and 5. But I'll have my team stay afterwards. However, in exchange, I would like, and then you name it. For people to value a concession, they must appreciate that you are giving something up. And I gave you the quick example of my mom making lunch, or I think I did. My mom making my lunch for me every day. I just thought that that was her reason for being. Really? Isn't that what moms are supposed to do? Holy cow, I've been disabused of that thought. But she never made a big deal out of it. She is a saint. I am not. My kids know every single ounce of pain that's associated with being their parent. And I extract things from them. And I don't leave it to chance. I don't want some ugly tie or some mug that they made. I tell them what I want. So just keep that in the back of your mind. In terms of another distributive negotiation strategy that I may have shared with you is ratification. And that is an end game tactic. And we have different moral compasses on the call. And I told you at the beginning of this course that my goal is to give you a toolbox. You may use some of these tools, or it could be, you know, Debbie says, Stace, I'm not a jerk. I would never use that strategy. And she looks really nice, so that's probably true. However, the value of this course is what happens when those strategies are used against you. Ratification is the end tactic of giving up power to get power. Very shorthand example. I go into a used car dealership to buy a car. Karen is on the floor. She is the sales associate. And we spend 45 minutes going back and forth. And she's given me what I think to be a fantastic deal. Now, because of our rapport, I've confessed that I can't spend $1 over $12,000. And having not taken a negotiation course with me, I was honest about it. That's my legit reservation price. However, Karen is like, hey, that's okay. We're throwing in Apple Music, heated steering wheels, like fancy mud flaps. That's really all I know about cars. And I was like, that's fantastic, Karen. Thank you so much. At which point Karen says, oof, Stace, you've driven such a hard bargain. I'm going to have to go get my managers. So they see me and they're like, Stace, I'm sorry. Karen's new. And she gave you heated steering wheel for $12,000? No. Now, working with that price point, we can't do the heated steering wheel. Karen, she's still learning. She missed training because of Corona. Maybe she'll catch up. The mud flaps, whoa, no, those don't come in either. But at your price point and over the course of 20 minutes, they claw back much of the value I had gained. Karen's responsibility was to be the advanced team. She gained a ton of information about me, what my interests are, what my reservation price was. And then she concedes, I'm sorry, you drove such a hard bargain. I can't do this deal. Brings in a manager who then claws back all of that value. Why is this an in-game tactic? Because it's a lousy thing to do to people. And after you do it, they will not want to negotiate with you again. However, be aware that that tactic is out there. So what do you do when someone does that? There are several approaches. What we'll see for what I consider bad negotiation behavior, label it. When I walk in, I will say, hey, Karen, I hope we're not going to spend 45 minutes on the floor and then you're going to run back and get your manager. Because that strikes me as some type of good cop, bad cop thing. We're not going to do that, right? Sometimes calling someone on their behavior will force a change. Another approach is making sure you're negotiating with the correct person to begin with. Hey, Karen, I took a Hopkins mini course on negotiation, so I'm pretty good at this. Do you have the authority to authorize whatever deal we come up with? In other words, you're not going to hand me a package and then say that you don't have the authority to do that. Because if that's what's going to happen, I'd prefer to negotiate with that person now. Third strategy, And I don't get into gender, well, that's a lie. I get into gender a lot, but this is a strategy or approach that I keep in the deep recesses of my back pocket, and that is appealing to ego. Now, this isn't necessary often. However, if someone, for example, has mansplained healthcare law to me or something else that I think I know about, this might be a situation where I pull it out. In a situation like that, when they're like, hey, I've got to go get my boss, and again, read the room, read the situation. Wow. Given your demeanor, I really thought you had the authority to do this. I mean, if you have to go get your manager because you don't have enough experience, enough seniority, I mean, that's okay. I'll wait while you go get your parent. I mean your manager. Now, do I do this often? No, but I'm not above doing it. So those are some of the strategies that are open to you in distributive negotiation. So then we'll move on. Moving on to integrative negotiations. If you're focused on the long-term relationship, or you value the relationship, or you have long-term goals, integrative negotiations make sense. And I introduced you very briefly to different terminology. And the terminology that we talked about were positions, interests, BATNA, which you'd already been introduced to. And your position is, and what people are very open with, what I want. The submerged part of the iceberg is why you want what you want. And by delving into that, that is where you can put more Legos on the table, find out what drives them. And if you can meet those interests, people's death grip on their position goes away. So in terms of strategies associated with integrative negotiation skills, building trust is incredibly important. As I told my students, and I believe I've told you, during the first 5 minutes of any session, I have people's maximum attention. At that point, you're figuring out, is this mini course worth calling in for? Am I going to learn anything? It is during that time that I like to make a small concession, a freebie, where I disclose information that I'm not required to. And I do that to signal that I am being open. And I'm pretty sure I shared this with you, but I'm repetitive. I'm not a hugger. I'm just not. And thankfully, with Corona, I don't have to hug anymore. But when I teach over at Bloomberg, I have to like steel myself, because holy cow, those people over there, they're kind, they're warm, and they hug. I went over there to teach my class, and I see one of my former students in the hallway, at which point I'm like, hey, what's up? Before I know it, my arms are around them. It was the most terrifying thing in the world. Why were my arms around them? Because they exude this nice, friendly openness thing. They hugged me. Before I knew it, I hugged them back. It was so innate, so reflexive that I got out of my own way and I hugged them back. Now, why is that important? When you are genuine and you set the tone of the negotiation early on, it opens the door for people to get out of their own way and deal with you on a more honest, straightforward matter. Does it work all the time? No, but if you don't do it, it absolutely won't work. All right, I gave a little tip for females. I'll throw a little tip in for males. The research says that if men engage in small talk in the beginning of a negotiation, that they reap more value than if they don't. And that is, from a societal perspective, we do not expect men to ask about your kids or the weather or sports. So if they actually take the time to do that, we're like, oh, they must be really nice. So guys, do that. Women, does it help you if you do it or you don't do it? No, it doesn't. Anyway, the most important thing about integrative negotiations, though, and the key to doing it well, is asking questions. So let's quickly get to how do you ask questions. This is a summarizing slide. Looks cool. Look at it on your own. This is a comparison between distributive and integrative. pretty much what I just spent 5 minutes talking about. Again, highly attractive slide. Look at it on your own. Boom, asking questions. It's all coming back to me now. I think this is where we stopped. To truly find out someone's interests, that what exists beneath the position, you've got to find out what they're all about. And you do that through the art of the question. And the art of the question is very much structured like a funnel. And the funnel starts, very wide at the top. And only as you gather more information do you get more narrow. Why do you ask questions? You ask questions for a couple reasons. First, it allows you to gain information about the other side. Also, as emotions begin to rise and people get heated, the best way to lower the tension in the room is to ask a question. Asking questions allows people to get engaged. And in responding to your questions, you find out key information about them. If you're a physician, if you're in the healthcare industry, you guys are good at asking questions. And I think I gave this example already. With my health insurance, I've got 15 minutes with my healthcare provider. Within those 15 minutes, I'm going to say, oh, my shoulder hurts. Within those 15 minutes, they are skillful enough about asking questions to pinpoint where that is coming from. You guys have the skill to ask questions. What I'm asking for is to take that skill set and transfer it to negotiations. And I want you to focus on how you do that well, because typically when people don't ask questions, the explanation I get is, oh, I don't want to pry, or I thought that was inappropriate. When a doctor is asking me very personal questions about where the pain comes, where it originated, what does it smell like, there is no sense of, am I prying too much? No, it's part of your job. And because it's part of your job, you enter into it with a lack of self-consciousness that allows you to be effective and allows the patient or the person that you're asking to respond not from an area of discomfort. So I encourage you to tap into that in your negotiations. All right, types of negotiation. Start with the open questions, and those are the who, what, when, where, and why. And that invites further information. If we had an example that we walked through last time about, hey, I don't want the office without a window. So, Bobby, why is having an office with a window so important to you? Bobby says, it helps me be productive. Okay. So Bobby, what does being productive look like to you? What are things you need to maximize your productivity? As she begins to explain that to you, well, actually, I'd like an ergonomic chair. I'd like a space heater because it gets really cold. I'd like a bigger screen. All of these things are giving me added areas to negotiate. Wow, I have an ergonomic chair at home that I'm not using. So that allows me to introduce something outside of the negotiation to expand the pie such that maybe she would give, if I can meet the things that help her become productive, she may let go of that death grip of wanting the window. Also, I might ask Bobby, a year from now, what does you being fully productive look like? Bobby's like, wow, if I had maximum productivity for a year, I'd have a raise, I'd have a bigger lab space, I would have applied to 2 grants. All of this is telling me crucial information about her. Is there any way I can help her become that 1 year out vision of herself? And the reason why I project it out a year in advance is it gives me more room to work, and she's more open to something that will help her on a go forward basis. So the importance of asking questions, why is this important to you? And listening allows you to expand the pie. Now, with all those questions, you need to know yourself and need to know what types of questions you can ask. I never ask feeling questions. My face does not allow me to do that. Nobody buys that I care how they feel about stuff. However, if you have a caring face, how do you feel about it? As you begin to get more information from the people, then you begin to go from open to more closed questions. Is, are, can, how. These are questions that ultimately could be answered with a yes or no. In the beginning part of the negotiation, you stay in the realm of open. In addition, in preparing for negotiations, there are facts, and then there are assumptions that you make. You spend your time asking open questions to test those assumptions. If I feel that, wow, Bobby has a free software package and key parking, and the narrative that I've created around that is, wow, she's a real go-getter. She's probably hyper aggressive. What if I go into the negotiation with that frame of reference? If Bobby makes a legitimate open offer, I'm going to be distrustful of it. So in preparing for the negotiation, the fact is, I know she has software. I know she has parking. I've told myself a story about how she got it. One of my key questions is, hey, Bobby, I see that you have Windows 365. How'd you get that? Her response may be, I have an R1, as part of the grant, they just installed it on my laptop. Or, you got a sweet parking spot. How'd you do that? Oh, it goes in reverse alphabetical order. Name starts with T. I was next up on the list. That fundamentally changes my approach to her. So, go into a negotiation. What would I need to hear from Bobby to no longer think that she's an aggressive gunner? And be open to hearing that. As you begin to get more information about Bobby, only then do you begin to go to the narrow part of the question. And closed leading questions. While they sound really cool on Law and Order, are you saying you'll resign if we don't agree? Do not do those. Do not do them if you want to stay married. Do not do them if you want your colleagues to like you. Those questions force people into a corner of which there's seldom a graceful exit. They sound good on TV, not in real life. All right. Boom. My favorite questions. My favorite questions are window and circle questions. And these are incredibly important because of what they add to a negotiation. Oftentimes in negotiations, there is one word that will dominate the discussion. And both sides are using it. So Bobby says, I need the office to be productive. What, you don't think I want to be productive? I want to be productive too. Well, Bobby says, well, yeah, but I really need to be productive. So we're both using the word back and forth. Pause. Bobby, what does productivity look like for you? If there is a key word, because for her, productivity means quiet. I can't be productive unless it's quiet. For me, productivity means I need an office that's big enough for me to have a conference table so I can bring in my team members. Because without meeting with them on a daily basis, and the other office is smaller, we are talking past each other. So if there's a key term, and typically you will find this in, that's too expensive. What does expensive look like to you? Or when I'm talking with my kids, oh, that's not fair. Okay, monster number one, define what fairness is to you. And as people begin to unpack or define that term for you, the beauty in their answer is it is value laden. They are telling you what they care about. Can you meet any of those interests? All of this allows you to go beyond the position of, I want the office with the window. In integrative negotiations, your goal is for doable and durable agreements. And there are three buckets of negotiations. Just to set this up, this is a fruit metaphor. Thank you. There are green negotiations, means not ripe. There are ripe negotiations, and then there are rotten negotiations. A green negotiation is one that is so infused with emotion that I am so pissed off at you right now. I could not get to a reasonable solution to this if my life depended on it. Oh, I don't know. Look at Congress right now. They are so embroiled with both sides, U-Haul worth of baggage that coming up with that they can't even get to the issue. There are ripe negotiations, and a ripe negotiation is one that I see you as a person. I understand what your interests are, and through that, we've maximized our understanding of each other, and your goal is to get to an agreement that both sides feel okay with. Because if I don't feel okay with it, you will get a rotten negotiation. What is a rotten negotiation? If the parties haven't changed, the situation hasn't changed, are you having the same conversation over and over again? In my professional life, I'm a decent negotiator. As a mom, my skills are questionable. And it usually goes with when my kids have to surrender their cell phones. 8:30 every night, they go on the counter in the kitchen. This has been the rule for as long as they've had phones. I've been their moms for their entire lives. Yet every night you would think that this, what? It's 8:30. We on the counter in the kitchen? That is not a doable and durable agreement. We're repeating the same issue over and over again. Now, if I were a different type of parent, I would try to invite them into the process of setting a reasonable time. This is not that household. Understand where they're coming from and meet their interests. When you do that, they feel that they've been an active participant, they feel valued, and a humongous human need is to feel heard and understood. And if those are not elements of your agreement, then through being passive aggressive, through complaining, through sabotage, we will repeat this. And you may, because of your power over me, get my cooperation for now. But the second that I have the opportunity to pay you back, I will. So it is very important to make the other person more human, to make them feel heard and understood, if your goal is a doable and durable agreement. Circle questions, explaining the larger context. Oftentimes, we are asked to do something without a clear understanding of how this fits in to the entire picture. Going back to my kids. So they put their cell phones on the counter in the kitchen because looking at blue screens, all that stuff disrupts sleep. I want them to grow up to be healthy, happy people, well-adjusted. They need reading time, blah, blah, blah. This is a bad example because they've not been convinced of this. However, to what extent are you explaining the ask and how it fits into the larger picture or concept? Oftentimes, especially with people that we manage. Hey, I need this by 5 o'clock. Well, it's the start of a 3-day weekend and I was about to leave. Without explaining why I need that check for payroll right now, you build up my level of resentment. Take the time to explore the larger context and have them explain to you the process. I've asked for you to cut a check within 15 minutes. I know that kind of sucks, but what's involved in that? Oh, I'm glad you asked. When you ask for a check at 5 o'clock, that requires me to go to Central to get, and in explaining the process, they feel more heard and understood. You then have the ability to, so is there a process where we can improve upon this? Are there other things that we can do? So I encourage you to use circle and window questions to increase your level of understanding when you're negotiating with someone. And as you do that, you find out more what drives them, what's important to them. And if you can meet those things, when you come to me at 5 o'clock and you treat me like a cog in a wheel, it pisses me off. Is there a way that I can make you feel more valued, more respected? And if so, then you may be more inclined to help me get that check through. All right, moving on to our next thing. Woohoo! For now, those are the two basic frameworks for negotiation, integrative and distributed. And that's very much at the ground level. In terms of strategies and approaches, they become increasingly more complex. And my final thoughts on interest before I move on to planning. What's also vital about learning about someone's interests is I need to approach you through the framework of something that you value. When we are negotiating, when I'm asking you to do something, I essentially need to rent space in your brain to listen to me. How do you know when you have enough information about the other side to start moving from open to closed questions? For me, at that point, there are no more whys. Now, it may be you don't have enough information, but they're not willing to share anymore. At that point, boom, if you run up against the brick wall, then you begin to transition into more of the, what are the actual things we need to do? I've explored your interest. I feel I have a pretty good handle on what's important to you. So now let's start focusing on the deal. Do you want the office space? How many rooms do you need? At that point, I would begin moving. Oh yeah, interests. You need to frame the interest in a way that is appealing to them. So if I'm talking to, yet again, Bobby about the office, and she's all about productivity, and I'm like, well, let's talk about what's fair. Bobby's like, I don't care if it's fair. That is not one of her key interests. So for me to make headway with Bobby, I need to frame my asks, what's important to me, in language that will resonate with her, which would be in terms of productivity. So talking about equality or equity or fairness, it's not really ringing a bell here. Not a big deal to her. So when you ask questions, you are trying to figure out, how do they view things? What terms or values are important to them? And then can you funnel your asks, your requests in language that resonates with them? I hate numbers. I hate data. It confuses me. If I was going to do that, I would have been a finance person. I'm a lawyer. I like words. If you hand me something like a spreadsheet or a graph or anything with numbers, I am so not listening to you. I do not care. And you may be making very valid points, but guess what? Don't care. Yep, still don't care. If, however, you talk to me about force stability in terms of precedent, in terms of fairness, in terms of equity, I'm like, ding, ding, ding. Oh, now you have my attention. So if Bobby talks about, hey, in terms of, Stacey, you seem to have an embarrassment of riches. You've got the software, you've got the parking. Now, I'm not really excited about this, but because it speaks to my fairness, I'm like, wow, I do have a ton of resources. That does seem kind of unfair. She may make more headway with me. So listen, and planning for and doing well in a negotiation is actually exhausting with the level of attention you need to pay to what is being said. So with this background, what I'd like for us to do is to begin to plan for a negotiation. And I gave you a pretty complex one with numbers, but I kept the numbers manageable for me. And it's about a bookstore. And we will use it for this session and for next session, Because based off this scenario, we will walk through, if I'm the bookstore owner, how I would plan for this negotiation. Next class, we'll briefly run through the landlord's approach, but there are advanced negotiation skills and strategies that I would use at the table. And using this scenario, I will walk you through definitely some intermediate and a few advanced. And advanced is just the PC word I use for hardball tactics that are embedded within this negotiation. And you're like, what? Seems like a very straightforward, nice negotiation. No, it's not. All right, here's the background in case you haven't had a chance to read it. So this grandkid just became legal owner of a bookstore. He's really psyched about it. It's in a good location. His parents have owned the bookstore for a number of years, and it is important to his grandparents that it stays where it is. His grandparents have been very good tenants. Now they're paying $10 a square foot, which is above market value, but his grandparents apparently have plenty of money and they're okay with that. In the first floor of the retail space, there are two other tenants. There was a cafe and a nail salon. And the cafe is leaving, which will free up about 60 additional square footage. Yeah, numbers. More space that you're interested in buying. Now, there are, for all scenarios, it could be a distributive negotiation or an integrative negotiation. If you chose to view this as an integrative negotiation, you are very much thinking, I want the maximum square footage for the cheapest price. I do not care about what your interests are. I'm not really into asking you a ton of questions about how you feel about this. I'm going to calculate what my reservation price is, the highest I will go, what my target price is. I'm going to have an initial offer that is outside that zone, and we're going to negotiate hardcore because my goal is to maximize my outcome of the most square footage for the least amount of money. That would be the distributive approach. However, we're beyond that. We are going to take an integrative approach to this negotiation. Now, here is the simplified planning document. And it always starts with you identifying what's this negotiation about. I am the grandkid, and I have just become owner of the bookstore. The cafe is moving out, so there's additional square footage available. From my perspective, as the grandkid, what is this negotiation about? What we'll find is that in real life, negotiations are hybrid negotiations. All right, so on to the planning document. Yes, you will combine these issues. And what we'll learn is when you have a multi-issue negotiation, you never negotiate issue by issue. Because if you negotiate issue by issue, it turns it into a distributive and you will lose. For example, Mark offers me a new job. And can I start June 1st? No. I'd like to work out of your Baltimore office. No. I'd like to be in this department. No. If you go issue by issue, it invites conflict and a very distributive approach. If, however, you link issues, it makes it more integrative and it's harder to say no. So I see that it's really important to you that I teach online classes, and that's great. I've got the skill set. I'd really like to do that, but I'd prefer that I start July 1st. By linking those two issues and making them connected, we're not talking about online courses unless we're talking about my start date. That invites more negotiation and more of an exploration of possibilities. But anyway, for this negotiation, the stated purpose, yes, this negotiation is about more than just square footage. Keeping the family legacy. You want to make grandpa and grandma happy. So these things, these intangible soft things are also at the table. And because you want to preserve those things, which ding, 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 the relationship is very important. The long-term goals of having the bookstore operate into perpetuity are important. That takes it out of a fight back and forth about exclusively the price. So when I think about what is the stated purpose of this negotiation, I think about, I want to make my grandparents proud. I want to keep the bookstore going. And if you read in the grandkids' roles, you'd like to increase the offering and build a cafe. So you'd like to expand upon the initial footprint and offerings of the bookstore. Because you looked over the past 5 years and sales are dipping a little bit. So really, to preserve the legacy, you need to change things up a little bit. So all of these things go into preserving and making the bookstore a thriving enterprise. So with that stated purpose, and I'd like to think of that as something a bit more broad than a position. Positions seldom have values infused in them. Positions typically are, dude, I want to pay $5 a square footage. The goal of this negotiation is far broader than that. And you get into that more expansive thinking when you get out of the realm of distributive negotiation and factor in your long-term profitability and the relationship that you have with your grandparents. The next thing that you would consider is, what are your interests? What do you want out of this negotiation? Keep the family legacy. You want to increase the offerings to include book rentals, board games, and purchase of magazines. You want a small cafe with an area to sit and read. You want a price that's affordable, because you can't expand into the entire spot paying $10 a square foot. That's just a non-starter. So those are some of the things that are of interest to you. Knowing what you know, and let's assume you've not read the other role, what do you think their interests are? The landlord. In preparing for the negotiation, for you to be really effective, you need to step into the shoes of the other person. What do you think they want? Money and a long-term tenant. Yeah, that'd be very good. Now, these are assumptions. What questions do I need to ask when I sit down at the negotiation to figure out, does he care about stability? Does he value a long-term relationship? So when you begin to explore their interests, make sure you are crafting, and it's not in the planning document, but a third column. What are the questions I have to ask? The who, what, when, where, and why questions to get at, are these legit? Now, once you begin to drill down on what their interests are, go back and think about, what do you bring to the table? If they want a long-term tenant and someone who's reliable, ding, 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 how does that give you a warm and fuzzy? Your parents have been there for a long time. They've never been late on rent. In terms of, they're not a bar, they're not like a paintball arcade. It's quiet, so it's probably not disruptive to other stores. Or part of the building is residential. They're not residential. How can you frame what you will ultimately want in language and resonating with values that are of importance to the landlord? So those are the things that you begin to explore as you go through interests. So again, in interest, it's always important what you want. Spend some time on that. That's pretty easy. Spending time on, what do I think they want? How does what you bring to the table further or enhance or even expand, same as enhance, whatever, their interests? And then, because I'm a I'm an attorney. For me, language is super important. How can I choose language that resonates with me being reliable, dependable, and looking for a long-term relationship? In my asks, in my package that I present, how can I structure that with saying it either directly or indirectly that this is the type of person that you were getting? And for me, I'm a newbie. I'm a kid. However, my grandparents did a great job raising me, and we have ideal or identical business practices. And what's very important to me is continuing their legacy. Ding, 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 ding. I want to continue the business much in the same way that my parents did. So that's a shorthand way of resonating with those values. Now, here's the deal. What's your plan B? If they're like, dude, you can't afford me, what do you do? If they don't come in at a price that makes sense, what do you do? And again, the stronger your plan B, the more leverage you have at the table. You could just stay in your original footprint, paying the same amount that you're paying. And that 60 square foot space or whatever it is just stays unoccupied. Or that's his problem. So one option you have is just to stay put. Now, here's the thing. When we think of plan Bs, they are something that exists outside of the negotiation. Restructuring the bookstore, renegotiating the price, that is all within the negotiation. Me staying put, I still have a valid lease. I don't have to do anything. That exists, that option exists outside of whatever deal I may make with the landlord. Another option is you can create an online presence with readbooks.com. Now that's highly unattractive. Your grandparents would have conniptions. However, that is a legitimate business option that exists outside of this negotiation. So guys, when you're thinking about what is my plan B, that is, this blows up. The landlord will never speak to me again, but he will cash my checks. What are my possible courses of action? One is I keep the current lease that I have. Another is I consider going in to the online space. Another is you do have your buddy who's offered to reconfigure in the footprint that you have, so you could do some upgrades there. Those are things outside of the negotiation. And the more attractive they are, the more leverage you have. Now, do you know what their plan B is? No. But you might ask. So now, if you say, so, dude, if you don't rent to me, what are you going to do? They're not going to answer that, even if they haven't taken a negotiation class. However, questions to get at their BATNA. How soon are you looking at closing this deal? And the guy says 40 to 45 days. To me, oh, so it sounds like you want to move pretty quickly. So to me, and if you're approaching me, I might say, so am I competing with other people? Ask questions. You're the only game in town and they want to move fast. It's in their best interest to make you happy. If, however, they're like, dude, I've got 5, you are one of 5 interviews I have today, and I'm a trust fund landlord, so I can have this space empty for 5 years. That will reorient my thinking, but ask questions. The more you get at their BATNA, their plan B, the better it is. And if they share some information that could make and you can make their plan B less attractive. Wow, I heard that getting this place rezoned, or I don't know, there's a union strike. So there will be no think of something that would make their plan B less attractive. I'd throw that in there too. Now, here's the deal. you don't want to be a jerk to the bookstore owner. Ideally, you want him as the landlord, which would make me approach this, especially if I'm going into an integrative approach, because the relationship and my long-term goals are combined here to be more honest. So I may whiff, you know, I'm going to hold out till I get the right deal. But it could be, you don't know the exact date, but you assume that given that the cafe's lease next door ends in 35 to 40 days, that having a space open and not rented for a long period of time is going to be a cash drain. So I would assume that he would say, yeah, that's true. But again, asking these questions. Now, the stated purpose, going through interests, going through BATNA, that is very much in the integrative wheelhouse. You're doing all the touchy-feely understanding part. Then you transition into more of the distributive mindset, meaning what are the costs? What's your target point? What's your reservation point? And what are the questions that you'd ask the other side? People have a tendency to only focus on the person that they're going to be negotiating with. 3D Negotiation, a book I very much recommend, encourages you to do a field analysis. Who are the other folks that, while not at the table, influence the negotiation? So you better believe I'd go ask the cafe when they're leaving. And you know what I'd also ask them? What were you paying in rent? And holy cow, you were paying what? What was your relationship like? Were you ever late? Will they answer your questions? I don't know. They're leaving, probably. They have more of an incentive to be honest. So yes, when you get to the bottom, what other questions would you ask? It has of the other side. I want you to expand your thinking. Who are the other people not at the table in terms of the community, in terms of residents that on the upper floor? What do those people care about? And he rents all 10 floors. Did you find out from the residents that the cafe was really noisy and had a rodent problem and they scurried up the walls? So they'd really like someone who was cleaner. Do your homework. The more information that you get from the non-present players of the negotiation, the more you enhance your position. All right, next session, we will start by walking through the costs, the target, the reservation point, and we will, on a much quicker way, go through it for the landlord as well. Then, we will spend the bulk of our time walking through when those two parties sit down. And maybe I can even co-opt one of my RAs to play the other side as we give you like a 5-minute taste of what their interaction may look like. My RAs are like, what? We didn't sign on for that. And yeah, have a great rest of the week.